Hello and welcome to my end of year wrap up. It's been a long year but also a really short year and I didn't read as much as I wanted to, but let's get into it. My reading goal for the year, like most years, was 50 books. I'm filming this on the 22nd of December and as of today I've read 43 books. I do still think I might be able to catch up in the last week or so of the year, but I have to film this video now, so those last updates will be in my January TBR. Cool. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump into it. In January, I read 2 books. The first one I don't have to hold because I packed it away because frankly I don't want it on my shelves, and that is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I read it at the start of the year. I don't know why. I'm not going to talk about this book because I don't support the author and I'm not going to give it any more time. Moving on. The second book I read in January was If This Gets Out by Sophie Gonzalez and Gail Dietrich. I don't know how that's pronounced. This book was cute. I actually really enjoyed it. It did remind me of a big ship that was popular a little bit ago from like a really popular boy band, if you know what I mean. I assume that's what kind of inspired this. It's a really interesting story to look at, like people in the media hiding a relationship. It's really interesting. I liked this book a lot. In February I read 3 books and I was like really happy with that because it was more than the month before. I don't know. The first one though was The Love Hypothesis by Ellie Hazelwood. This book was really popular on TikTok. It was also said to be like really spicy and I just didn't think it was. It's very clearly rwrb fanfiction. I mean, I knew that going into it, and so like to me it's more of like a comedic thing rather than like a serious this is fanfiction thing. I mean, just looking at the cover, it's like that is Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley, so this book was fine. It's nothing to like write home about in my opinion, but it was just like a fine new adult romance. Next I read The Bookish and the Beast by Ashley Poston. I love this series. It's the Geekerella series or the Once Upon a Con series. I had gotten this I feel like a while before and it took me a while to read, but once I got into it I really loved it. I feel like this series is great for anyone who like has been in fandom. I mean, it's like a love letter to fandom. It's really nice. The last book I read in February is a book that's going to pop up a bunch throughout this video, and that is Red, White and Royal Blue. I have read this book a lot of times. I can't stop rereading it, and I guess my first one of the year was in February. I don't know how much I can say about this book without going into a spiral. I love this book. It's great. If you haven't read it, read it, but it is like new adult, so if you're young, maybe don't. In March, I read 2 books, the first of which being The Hunger Games. I love The Hunger Games. It felt like time for a reread. I adore this book and this series, and I think it's like weirdly more relevant right now than it should be. There's a really good Lena Norm's video about it that I'll try to remember to link. But yes, The Hunger Games is like my favorite series of all time, and so I reread it because of course I did. I also reread Heartstopper by Alice Oseman because the show was coming out and I thought I'd do one last reread before the show came out, and then the show came out and was like the greatest thing of all time. I love Heartstopper. Alice Oseman is a name that's going to pop up a lot through this video, so stay tuned, I guess. In April I read 5 books, the first of which is Heartstopper Volume 2 by Alice Oseman. Again, the show was coming out, I was doing a reread. I don't know how else to say it. I was rereading the series because I love it and the show was coming out. The next book I read was a little bit of a wild card. It is The Maltese Bestiary. My family's Maltese. I love like Maltese culture as a whole, and I'm writing a story that is inspired by Maltese folklore, and so I wanted to get this just to kind of familiarize myself with some of the more common Maltese folklore things. This is actually very interesting. I like the way it's set out, so Yay for research, I guess. I then continued my Heartstopper reread with volumes 3 and 4. I forget how like sad these get, but moving right along. I finished off the month with Nick and Charlie by Alice Oseman. It was the first time I think that I read this. It was really cute. Anything for a bit more Nick and Charlie content. It was great. I mean, it was kind of a little upsetting at one point, but then it was great. In May, I read 4 books, starting off with Red, White, and Royal Blue again. I'm not joking when I say that I reread this book all the time. I've read this book over 60 times, and I'm not saying that as like a flex or whatever. I don't think that's a good thing. I can't stop rereading it. I told myself I'm not allowed to read it for the rest of the year, so I haven't read it for like a month, and I'm like feeling withdrawn from it. Like I need it again. Next, I started my Osemanverse read-through with Solitaire. I had heard really good things about this book and just had never read it, and it was really interesting to, I guess, see a different character in the Osemanverse as the main character. I don't know how to say this better. Because I had only ever read Heartstopper, I knew Tori as like a side character, and now she was the main character. It's really interesting to see that like this was the start, like this came first, Heartstopper came later. So really Tori is the main character and Nick and Charlie are the side characters. But I loved this book. I loved some of the other characters. I love Tori as a character as well. I think that it captures that like kind of loneliness and like that internet culture that there was at the time this was written. Like I was a bit younger. I think this came out 2014, did it? Yeah. This came out in 2014, so I was like on the internet, but like not as much as I guess Tori. And that era of the internet was really interesting, and this book captured that in a way that I wasn't expecting. Next, I reread Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. I knew I wanted to do a reread of this series this year, and I started at the start. Why did I say that? Anyway, I continued my Osemanverse read-through with Radio Silence. I cannot believe that I read this for the first time this year. It was incredible and spoke to me in a way that I wasn't expecting. It like really hit me where it hurt. So yeah, this was great. I loved this book. This was incredible. If you haven't read Radio Silence, read it. In June, I read 3 books. The first being I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. Again, continuing the Osemanverse read through. I had read this before. This was the only Alice Oseman novel I had read, and I loved it. It's about like fandom. It's about like a band and a fan. It was incredible. The first time I read this, I read it in a night. I started at like 8 p.m. and read till 3 a.m. I love this book. The other 2 books I read that month were The Raven Boys and The Dream Thieves. I don't know how I feel about this series. I've read it maybe 2 or 3 times now, and it's good, but there's something about it that I'm not quite sure about. But the characters are compelling and it's a good time. July came around and you will never guess what I read. Red, White, and Royal Blue. Again. I also did my Heartstopper reread. I know, I had just read them, but I reread them, and if you want to watch me do that, there is a video of me doing that, so it will be linked. Reading them all like back to back is a different experience to slowly reading them, and I really enjoyed doing that again, so yeah. I then read This Winter by Alice Oseman. It was the first time I read this novella, and it was interesting. Like, I liked it. It wasn't like happy though. I was gonna say like it was good, but like it didn't feel good. It was like a bit of a bummer, you know? So yeah, it was interesting. It added to like the world that Alice had created. I then also reread Nick and Charlie because I was doing this read through, so I read them. Cool. In August, I read 3 books, starting with Loveless by Alice Oseman. This was the end of the Osemanverse read through that I did, and this book I wasn't expecting it to hit the way it did. I expected to relate to the main character at least a little bit. It was, oh, this book sent me into a spiral. And honestly, not gonna elaborate. I feel like it's like, if you know, you know, let's move along. The next book I read was A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow. I hadn't heard of this book, but then I saw photos from the movie set and thought that it looked cool because it was kind of like English countryside kind of vibe. So I read it and then it like consumed me. I loved this book. It was actually like very sweet. I don't read a lot of just like romance, and it was very sweet. I liked it a lot. I then decided that there was a series I wanted to reread. I just had happened to have already read the first book, so I read it again. The Hunger Games. Got another read this year. I'm not gonna lie, I forgot that I read it the first time, so I read it again. This time with the intention of reading the whole series. I clearly had a very big reading month in September, reading an entire one book. I read Catching Fire in September and that's it. I don't know what happened, to be honest. I just didn't read. So yes, Catching Fire. This is my favorite book of the series. It's my favorite movie of the series. I think it's one of the best book to movie adaptations to ever be created. I could talk about this for a long time, so I'm just gonna move on. But Catching Fire is great. I love this book. In October, I read 2 books, starting with Mockingjay. This book always takes me longer to read. It is a bit slower. There is like a middle section that like not a lot happens. I think I used to be annoyed at that when I was younger, and as I get older, I'm like, this is a book about war. Like sometimes there just is like weirdness. I don't know how to explain that properly. But yeah, I like this book. It's The Hunger Games. Of course I like it. Come on, that was like my whole personality for years. I also read Clockwork Prince by Cassandra Clare, continuing my Infernal Devices reread. Words are hard, man. It's pretty early in the morning. In November, I read 4 books, starting with the Heartstopper Yearbook. I wasn't gonna count this as a book read, but like I did read all of it, so it counts. This isn't like a necessity. This isn't something you have to read if you like Alice Oseman's books, but it's one of those companions that is just fun to have, and I really enjoyed it. I then read Clockwork Princess, which hit just as hard as it always does. Every time I read that book, I think it's going to be easier to handle, and then it's not. Around this time, there was a bunch of news about the Percy Jackson show that's in the works, and so I did reread The Lightning Thief. This cover is so shiny. I have read the Percy Jackson series maybe 3 times, but I've never like sat with it and let myself take in the story. I'm always speed reading it, which I'm not gonna lie is what I'm doing now because the end of the year is here and I want to get my goal. So I also read The Sea of Monsters. I didn't realize how bad the lighting was. I have changed it now and now it looks completely different, so we're just I'm sorry. That brings us to December, where I started the month rereading Red, White and Royal Blue. I know I just said that I wasn't allowed to read it for the end of the year. Turns out I did, though. I forgot. I never remember reading it. It's like a fever dream every time I read it. But I'm not allowed to reread it. I'm not going to let myself read this for a while. But I did read it at the start of December. To be fair, I had been reading it like through November. I finished it at the start of December though, so it counts. Sorry. The next book I read was Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. I reread The Infernal Devices so that I could reread this series, which I guess you don't have to, but I wanted to. Yeah, I had read this before, maybe twice, and this was the first time that I was like in it and I cared about all the characters and just loved everyone. This might be one of my favorite Cassandra Clare series now, maybe. I followed that up with Chain of Iron, which absolutely ruined me. I knew what happened in this book, but I had forgotten the details, and the details are where it gets you. I forgot about the end of this book, and so when that came, I was just shocked and hurt, and I feel so much for all of these characters, and I can't stop thinking about what's going to happen in Chain of Thorns because I keep looking at the family trees so I know who ends up with each other and I want to know how it happens. But yes, I love these books so much. This is around the time where I realized that like we were at the end of the year and I was very behind in my reading goal, so I started like speed reading. These next two books I was about 65% of the way on and had stopped reading them months ago, so I picked them back up and finished them. The first is A Little Bit Country. I actually really enjoyed this book. It felt like the end was maybe a bit rushed, but overall it was pretty good. I did see the like plot twist coming. I feel like it was very obvious, but that didn't mean I didn't enjoy it. It was like a cute little book. I also read My Policeman. I'm not going to pretend that I was interested in this book before like the movie. I read it because of like the news around the movie. I haven't watched the movie. I watched the first half of it and then stopped for some reason. But it was like an okay book. I liked it. It just felt like the end again kind of just happened. Like maybe it was just the way I was reading, but the end felt a bit abrupt. The last two books that I've read were Blue Lily, Lily Blue and The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. I finished The Raven Cycle. I feel like the end of this series was rushed. Like it was good, but it felt like there were a lot of loose ends and they just quickly tried to tidy them all up. So yeah, this is not my favorite series, but I reread it. It's fine, you know? I was rereading the series because I was interested in reading the other books, like the spin-off books, but I don't think I'm gonna do that now. I just don't think the writing style really works for me, and I guess I'm not that invested in the characters' lives, which is unfortunate. So that's everything I've read so far. I do think I can reach my goal, and I'm going to show you what I'm currently reading and what I will be reading. I'm like determined to get this goal. So I'm currently, where did it go? I'm currently reading The Titan's Curse, which will then be followed up with the rest of the Percy Jackson series. I think I can get these done within a few days, so I'm pretty sure these will be read by the end of the year. That would bring me up to 46 books. I'm also currently reading If We Were Villains. I'm not very far through, but if I try, I can read this. That would bring us to 47. I am determined to read this book. It is tiny, it's a kid's book, and I really want to read it. I know that's bad, but it's like the novelization of my favorite childhood movie, so maybe I'll read this today actually. That will bring me to, was that 48? That'll bring me to 48 books, which means I need 2 more. See, realistically, I could just decide, oh, I'm going to reread Heartstopper, or I'm going to reread, like, Nick and Charlie or This Winter, because they're short, but I don't want to just, like, reread something for the sake of hitting the goal. I don't know exactly what I'm going to read. I was also thinking about the Seanan Maguire books, like, what's the first one called? Every Heart a Doorway. I do want to reread those, so maybe in the new year. Or I could, you know, go back to the classic. Maybe I will. I read this book really quick because I know the story. I absolutely like tear through it. But no, okay. That's all. That was a lot of books, to be fair. So even if I don't read anything else this year, I've read 43 books, which is still pretty good if you ask me. I know there are people who read like 200 books a year, and I'm so happy for them, but it could never be me. There are a few like statistics I want to share because I tracked my reading in a spreadsheet this year. I have a pie chart here of rereads, and it is 65% of what I read this year were rereads, which is not good. I don't want to reread so much next year, so I guess if I'm setting goals moving forward, I'd like to have like less rereads. I'd say like maybe 33% is my cutoff. I'll let myself have a third rereads and then like not. To be fair, this year I did reread like Alice Oseman and some of the Cassandra Clare stuff, so there was a lot of rereads, but hopefully next year I'll stick to new books or new to me books. I also want to get through my physical TBR because I have so many books that I haven't read that I need to get through. I did read a lot of queer books. 52.4% of the books I read were queer. and then 14.3% had side characters, and then 4.8% had some POVs but not at all. So there was representation, but obviously not in every book. If I look at the pie chart of authors, 38.1% of what I read was by ellaloux, which feels about right to me. Cassandra Clare was at 11.9%, and then Maggie Stiefvater, Suzanne Collins, and Casey McQuiston were all at 9.5%, which is fine until you realize that I only read one Casey McQuiston book this year over and over again. My most popular genre was contemporary, followed by graphic novel and fantasy. So that feels about right for my normal reading. I do have a bunch of reading goals for the new year, so maybe I'll make a video about that, but that is all I have for you today. I'm happy with the amount that I read this year. How much did you read? Did you hit your goal? Do you think I'm gonna hit my goal in the next, like, 8 days or so? I'm gonna go, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you can give it a thumbs up. You can subscribe. I upload 2 videos a week, and I will see you next time. Bye.